more like it. Now, state your business.
We want to see the wizard.
The wizard? But nobody can see the Great Oz. Nobody's ever seen the Great Oz. Even I've never seen him.
Well, then how do you know there is one?
Because I don't. You're wasting my time.
Oh, please. The wizard will explain it.
The wizard.
Solar geoengineering is the idea that you could, in principle, reduce the rate of climate change or reverse it by making the Earth more reflective, by reflecting away more sunlight, for example, by putting reflective particles, aerosol pollution, if you like, in the upper atmosphere, or by putting reflective particles, aerosol pollution, if you like, in the upper atmosphere. I don't want to depress you too much. The problem is absolutely soluble, and even soluble in a way that's reasonably cheap. Cheap meaning sort of the cost of the military, not the cost of medical care. Cheap meaning a few percent of GDP. This is really important to have this sense of scale. What I'm going to talk to you about tonight is stuff that we might do if we did nothing, and it's this stuff in the middle here, which is what you do if you don't stop the emissions quickly enough, and you need to somehow break the link between human actions that change climate and the climate change itself. But one of the reasons it's politically hard is there are winners and losers, not all losers. This geoengineering idea in its simplest form is basically this following. You could put fine particles, say sulfuric acid particles, sulfates, into the upper atmosphere, the stratosphere, where they'd reflect away sunlight and cool the planet. And I know for certain that that will work. Not that there aren't side effects, but I know for certain it will work. As it cools down, because we've shielded the atmosphere a little bit, there's no big mystery about it. There's lots of mystery in the details, and there's some bad side effects, like it partially destroys the ozone layer, and I'll get to that in a minute, but it clearly cools down. And one other thing, it's fast. It's really important to say. So much if you do this, it's quick. And there are times you might like to do something quick. Another thing you might wonder about is, does it work? Can you shade some sunlight and effectively compensate for the added CO2 and produce a climate sort of back to what it was originally? And the answer seems to be yes. So here's the graphs you've seen lots of times before. That's what the world looks like under one particular climate model's view, with twice the amount of CO2 in the air. The lower graph is with twice the amount of CO2 and 1.8% less sunlight, and you're back to the original climate. And this graph from Ken Caldera, it's important to say came because Ken, at a meeting that I believe Marty Hoffert was also at in the mid-90s, Ken and I stood up at the back of the meeting and said, geoengineering won't work, and to the person who was promoting it said, the atmosphere is much more complicated, a bunch of physical reasons why it wouldn't do a very good compensation. Ken went and ran his models and found that it did.
Why, anybody can have a brain? That's a very mediocre commodity. Every pusillanimous creature that crawls on the earth or slinks through slimy seas has a brain.
People always talked about this idea, not as something that was foolproof, but as an idea to think about. But when climate became politically a hot topic, if I may make the pun, in the last 15 years, this became so un-PC we couldn't talk about it. It just sunk below the surface. We weren't allowed to speak about it. But in the last year, Paul Crutzen published this essay saying roughly what's all been said before, that maybe given our very slow rate of progress in solving this problem and the uncertain impacts, we should think about things like this. He said roughly what's been said before. The big deal was he happened to have won the Nobel Prize for ozone chemistry, and so people took him seriously when he said we should think about this, even though there will be some ozone impacts, and in fact he had some ideas to make them go away.
How can I ever thank you enough?
Well, you can't.
There was all sorts of press coverage all over the world, going right down to Dr. Strangelove Saves the Earth from The Economist. And that got me thinking. I've worked on this topic on and off, but not so much technically. And I was actually lying in bed thinking one night, and I thought about this child's toy, which...
Look at that! Look at that! I want to go home. I am Oz, the great and powerful. Who are you? Who are you?
We've come to ask you.
Silence!
Oh, Jimmy Cricket.
The great and powerful Oz knows why you have come. You billowing bale of bovine fodder!
Yes, Your Honor. I mean, Your Excellency.
Your wizardry. Enough!
I'll tell you very quickly how the effect works. There are a lot of fun complexities I'd love to spend the whole evening on, but I won't. There are a bunch of other versions of it that I and some collaborators have thought about how to exploit, and of course we may be wrong. This hasn't all been peer-reviewed. We're in the middle of thinking about it, but so far it seems good. But it looks like we could achieve long atmospheric lifetimes, much longer than before, because they're levitating. We could move things out of the stratosphere into the mesosphere, in principle solving the ozone problem. I'm sure there will be other problems that arise.
I'll have to give the matter a little thought. Go away and come back tomorrow.
Which would have minimal bad impacts in the mid of the planet where we live, and do the maximum job of what we might need to do, which is cooling the poles in case of planetary emergency, if you like. This is a new idea that's crept up that may be essentially a clever idea than putting sulfates in. Whether this idea is right or some other idea is right, I think it's almost certain that we will eventually think of cleverer things to do than just putting sulfur in.
You've had plenty of time already.
Yeah. Do not arouse the wrath of the great and powerful Oz.
That if engineers and scientists really turn their minds to this, it's amazing how it can affect the planet. The one thing about this is it gives us extraordinary leverage. This improved science and engineering will, whether we like it or not, give us more and more leverage to affect the planet, to control the planet, to give us weather and climate control, not because we plan it, not because we want it, just because science delivers it to us bit by bit, with better knowledge of the way the system works and better engineering tools to affect it. No interest in crazy ideas like engineering the whole planet. They develop science that makes it easier and easier to do. And so I guess my view on this is not that I want to do it, I do not, but that we should move this out of the shadows and talk about it seriously, because sooner or later we'll be confronted with decisions about this, and it's better if we think hard about it, even if we want to think hard about reasons why we should never do it. I'll give you two different ways to think about this problem that are the beginning of my thinking about how to think about it. But what we need is not just a few oddballs like me thinking about this, we need a broader debate. A debate that involves musicians, scientists, philosophers, writers who get engaged with this question about climate engineering and think seriously about what its implications are. This method I've come up with, you could create an ice age at a cost of 0.001% of GDP. It's very cheap. We have a lot of leverage. It's not a good idea, but it's just important. I tell you how big the lever is. The lever is that big. And that calculation isn't much in dispute. You might argue about the sanity of it, but the leverage is real. So because of this, we could deal with the problem simply by stopping reducing emissions, and just as concentrations go up, we can increase the amount of geoengineering. I don't think anybody takes that seriously. Because under this scenario, we walk further and further away from the current climate. You have all sorts of other problems like ocean acidification that come from CO2 in the atmosphere. Anyway, nobody but maybe one or two very odd folks really suggest this to cut them. There's a lot of uncertainty about exactly how much climate change is too much. That even though geoengineering was uncertain and morally unhappy, that it's a lot better than not geoengineering. And that's a very different way to look at the problem. It's using this as risk control, not instead of action. It's saying that you do some geoengineering for a little while to take the worst of the heat off, not that you use it as a substitute for action, but also what all the risks and downsides of it are. Right now you have a few enthusiasts talking about it, some in a positive side, some in a negative side, but that's a dangerous state to be in because there's very little depth of knowledge on this topic. A very small amount of money would get us some. Many of us, maybe now me, think we should do that, but I have a lot of reservations. And it's time to begin thinking about it, even if the reason we're thinking about it is to construct arguments for why we shouldn't do it.
Do you presume to criticize the great Oz? You ungrateful creatures think yourselves lucky that I'm giving you audience tomorrow instead of 20 years from now.
Oh,
The great Oz has spoken.
oh,
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. The great Oz has spoken.
Who are you?
oh, I am the great and powerful Wizard of Oz.
Have named submicron-sized particulates as being particularly harmful for human respiration. Through all the discussions today, I have not heard any mention of this fallout, and has this been studied, and also the effects of a highly reactive metal like aluminum on toxifying soils and waters?
No, I'm afraid it's true. There's no other wizard except me. You humbug! Yes, it's exactly so. I'm a humbug.
Oh, you're a very bad man.
Oh, no, my dear. I'm a very good man. I'm just a very bad wizard.
The question is, what would be the effects of these materials on human health if they came down into the stratosphere? In particular, small particles and aluminum.
So the collaborators of mine working on the aerosol scheme are actually folks from Carnegie Mellon who focused on human health impacts. And while we haven't published it, that was the very first thing we did, was do the order of magnitude calculation in level pencil and paper, but with an expert on human health impacts about whether there could be an issue. And for aluminum or other particles, there are a lot of toxicological things that need to get looked at seriously. But if you're just thinking about the sheer number of particles and the human health impact of small particles, the answer is, well, we haven't published it. That was the first thing we looked at with some of the leading experts who do epidemiological research on human health impacts, and it's not even close to being an issue.
Clarify, so 10 megatons of aluminum dumped into the atmosphere will have no human health impact.
So let me be more careful here. To separate out the toxicological, so the alumina we've only begun to research and published nothing. Alumina we've only begun to research and published nothing. Dane looked at him and he said, so you're telling me that spraying 10 to 20 megatons of aluminum, as you said, would have no human health effects? He took a deep breath and he swallowed and he said, let me be more careful here. We haven't done anything serious on alumina, and so there could be something terrible that we'll find tomorrow we haven't looked at. And that, for me, that was the whole main point of what is going to be coming out to the public. It's the damaging effects of aluminum that are being found around the world in massive amounts. Here's David Keith confronted on this very issue, and he looked, at that point, like they just let the cat out of the bag. We haven't done anything serious on alumina, and so there could be something terrible that we'll find tomorrow we haven't looked at.
Well, you forced me into a cataclysmic decision. The only way to get Dorothy back to Kansas is for me to take her there myself.
Oh, will you? Could you? Oh, but are you a clever enough wizard to manage it?
Child, you cut me to the quick. Premier balloonist par excellence to the Miracle Wonderland Carnival Company, until one day, while performing spectacular feats of stratospheric skill never before attempted by civilized man, an unfortunate phenomena occurred.
It's a highly irregular procedure. Absolutely unprecedented. I can't come back. I don't know